We are building the laptop store project from the YByte Python curriculum available at www.ybyte.in. We saw previously that there is this dictionary we have created, laptop, with 3 keys: brand, model, CPU. We could access the values corresponding to these keys by using square bracket. For example, laptop brand is WDell, laptop model is ABC111, and laptop CPU is WIntel i5. Notice it's the dictionary name, square bracket, the key, and you get the answer. But a natural question that comes up is, what happens if I were to try and access a key that does not exist? For example, let's say I try doing laptop, let's say RAM. Now clearly RAM is not a key on this. So when I do this, expectedly, I in fact end up with an error. The interpreter cell tells me that, look, there is a dictionary called laptop that I understand, but there is no key called RAM inside this dictionary. So it tells me a key error. If I were to try and, let's say, assign this to some value, for example, if I, let's say, do A is laptop RAM, clearly that is not possible because there was no error, there was no key to that name, and hence, in fact, A remains undefined. It turns out, however, that there is actually one more way of doing this, which is that I can use the get method. So let's say I try to do laptop dot say get, let's say, for example, RAM. Now this is interesting because notice I do not get any error whatsoever in this. In fact, if I were to try and, let's say, assign this to a value, again there is no error and B is empty. However, if I were to look at the type of B is defined, that is, but if I look at the type of B, that is what is called a none type. Now what's going on here is that, the get method is returning me a variable, but it's a none type, which means it's got no value whatsoever. Nonetheless, it is not an error. In fact, we can do something quite interesting with the get method. We can assign it to, we can tell it a default, let's say, value. For example, here, let's say I were to do B is laptop RAM and say 2 GB. Let's say 2 GB. Now in this case, when I run this code, notice B has become 2 GB. That is not because the laptop dictionary has been changed. I can check that, in fact, by seeing that, look, laptop is still the same 3 keys: brand, model, CPU, same 3 values. But what has happened now is that the get method returned this default value. Let's say one more example. So for example, if I have C is laptop dot get, for example, let's say CPU. Now clearly in this case C would be WIntel 5. In fact, I can try to give a default value as well. Let's say I just call it WAMD, let's say Ryzen, but that won't make any difference because CPU is a valid key on that particular dictionary. And hence that's what is returned. So the default value does not come into play. Now at this point, a question might be crossing your mind that, can I check if a particular key is part of a dictionary or not? Well, I could have certainly used one of these. For example, I could have tried accessing that value, through this method, let's say laptop bracket something, and I could have handled that error. For example, in what I get the key error. Alternatively, I could have used the get method and looked for the fact that I'm getting a none type, but that could be a little tricky because the value itself may be none. It turns out that there is one more method. I can in fact just use the in method to figure out if the key is part of this dictionary. So for example, let's say I will try if CPU in, let's say, laptop, well, that is true. On the other hand, RAM in laptop is, for example, not true because it is false because there's a key called CPU in the laptop, but there's no key called RAM inside the laptop. Of course, recall that we could get all the keys in a list, and from there also we can check if the key is present in this dictionary or not. Now before I wrap this up, let's look at something which is quite interesting, I think. Remember, we said that at the first approximation the usage of dictionaries seems quite similar to that of lists. Especially when we access, let's say, values. So notice here laptop square bracket brand, and I get WDell as we just discussed. What happens if I indeed try to access this just like a list? So for instance, what happens if I were to do laptop, for example, 0? Now this is how I let's say index into a list, how I access elements of a list. But if I were to do this, mind you, this is a dictionary. It is going by key and value. If I were to do this, I get an error, key error. That's because 0, remember, is not a key. So, while there are similarities, but bear in mind there are differences as well. I cannot access this like the way I was accessing lists because 0 is not a key. Think through this. In fact, I think this is kind of illustrative, and I hope you found this interesting. If you think this way of learning, where we experiment, we apply concepts, we build activities, is something that is interesting to you, do look at our website www.ybyte.in, because that is how we learn Python programming. Take care. Thank you so much. Bye bye.